Today I'm going to tell you about past lives of every GTA protagonist. Trust me, it's interesting. Starting with Claude, the silent protagonist from Grand Theft Auto 3. Now, I gotta be real with you. There's not a whole lot we know for sure about this guy's early days. Rockstar keeps Claude's background pretty vague, which only adds to his enigmatic vibe. What we can piece together is that Claude was something of a drifter before the events of GTA 3. Picture this: a young Claude, restless and always on the move, wandering from city to city across the GTA universe. We're talking Los Santos, Liberty City, you name it. Interestingly, we actually catch a glimpse of Claude in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which is set in 1992, about 9 years before GTA 3. In San Andreas, he's seen as a background character, already involved in the criminal underworld. This tells us that Claude's been in the game for a while, honing his skills and building connections long before he became the protagonist we know from GTA 3. But here's the thing. Claude's early life is mostly left to our imagination. Was he running from something? Looking for something? Or just a natural-born hustler trying to make his mark? We may never know for sure, and honestly, that's part of what makes Claude such an intriguing character. Now Tommy. Tommy was born and raised in Liberty City, the same mean streets we see in GTA 3 and 4. Growing up in Liberty City in the 1950s, young Tommy quickly learned the ways of the street. He wasn't some rich kid. Tommy came from a working-class background, which probably shaped his hustle mentality. Now, Tommy wasn't content with just being another face in the crowd. By the time he hit his teens, he was already running errands for the Vercetti family, one of Liberty City's major crime syndicates. Talk about an early start, right? But here's where Tommy's story takes a wild turn. In 1971, when he was just 20 years old, Tommy got himself into a serious situation. During a hit gone wrong, he ended up taking out 11 men. This incident earned him the nickname, the Harwood Butcher, and landed him a 15-year stretch in the slammer. While most people would have been broken by that, Tommy used his time inside to make connections and plan his comeback. When he finally got out in 1986, the Vercetti family decided to send him down to Vice City to expand their operations. And that's where Tommy's story really kicks into high gear. Vice City became his playground, and he went from being a small-time Liberty City gangster to the kingpin of a criminal empire. So there you have it, Tommy Vercetti's journey from Liberty City street kid to Vice City boss. It just goes to show, you can take the gangster out of Liberty City, but you can't take the Liberty City out of the gangster. CJ. CJ's story starts in the heart of Los Santos, specifically in the Grove Street neighborhood of Ganton. Born in 1968, CJ grew up in a tight-knit family with his older brother Sweet, his sister Kendall, and their mom, Beverly. Now, life in the hood wasn't always easy, but CJ had something special: a solid crew. The Grove Street families weren't just a gang, they were like an extended family. CJ, Sweet, Big Smoke, and Ryder were thick as thieves, watching each other's backs and dreaming of making it big. As a kid, CJ was already showing his skills. He wasn't just another face on the street. He was smart, quick on his feet, and had a talent for driving that would serve him well later on. His childhood wasn't all about gang life, though. CJ had a decent relationship with his family, especially his mom, who tried to keep him on the straight and narrow. But here's where things get interesting. In 1987, when CJ was around 19, his younger brother Brian died. The details are fuzzy, but CJ blamed himself for what went down. This guilt trip was heavy enough to make him pack his bags and bounce to Liberty City, leaving behind his family in the Grove. For 5 years, CJ laid low in Liberty City, trying to escape his past and make a new life. But as we all know, you can take the boy out of the hood, but you can't take the hood out of the boy. CJ's early life set the stage for the epic story we see in San Andreas. It's a tale of family, loyalty, and the struggles of growing up in a tough neighborhood. Despite the hardships, CJ's early years gave him the skills and connections he'd need to become the legend we know from the game, from Grove Street kid to Liberty City exile, and eventually, the hero of San Andreas. Nico. Nico was born in 1978 in Eastern Europe, likely in Serbia. Growing up wasn't exactly a walk in the park for our boy Nico. His childhood was marked by the harsh realities of the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. At just 17, Nico found himself in the army, witnessing and probably doing some pretty heavy stuff that would haunt him for years to come. After the war, life didn't get much easier. Nico tried to make an honest living, but opportunities were scarce in his war-torn homeland. He eventually fell in with the wrong crowd and started running with a small-time criminal outfit. This is where he met Ray Bulgarin, a sketchy character who'd come back to bite him later. Now, here's where things get messy. During a human trafficking operation in the Adriatic Sea, the ship Nico was working on sank. Nico managed to swim to safety, but Bulgarin accused him of intentionally sinking the ship and stealing the money. Talk about a bad day at work, right? With Bulgarin on his tail, Nico decided it was time for a change of scenery. His cousin Roman had been hyping up life in America, painting a picture of luxury and success. So, Nico hopped on a cargo ship and spent 7 months at sea, dreaming of a fresh start. In 2008, Nico finally arrived in Liberty City. But surprise, surprise, Roman's stories of success were a bit exaggerated. Instead of mansions and sports cars, Nico found a small, cockroach-infested apartment and a struggling taxi business. Classic Roman. From here, Nico's story in Liberty City unfolds. He gets pulled back into a life of crime, trying to protect Roman, pay off debts, and eventually seeking revenge on those who betrayed him during the war. Along the way, he makes allies, enemies, and even finds a bit of romance, all while wrestling with his past and trying to figure out his future. Nico's life is a roller coaster of war, crime, family ties, and the struggle for redemption. He's not your typical hero, more of a guy trying to do right in a world that keeps pushing him to do wrong. Michael. Our boy Michael wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Nah, he came into this world in the mid-1960s, somewhere in the Midwest. We're talking small-town vibes, probably not a lot going on. Young Michael's home life? Let's just say it wasn't exactly Brady Bunch material. His dad was out of the picture, either dead or just split, we're not sure. His mom? Well, she wasn't exactly winning any Parent of the Year awards. So, Michael did what any kid with a chip on his shoulder and dreams bigger than his hometown would do. He started hustling. This wasn't some after-school job flipping burgers. Michael was into the real stuff, pulling his first robbery before he even hit his teens. Talk about an early starter, right? As he got older, Michael's ambitions grew bigger than his small-town opportunities. He dropped out of high school and started drifting, looking for bigger scores and better chances. This is where Michael really started to build his skills. He wasn't just about brute force, but had a real talent for planning and strategy. In his travels, Michael eventually hooked up with Trevor Phillips, a wild card who'd become his partner in crime. These two were like fire and ice, but together, they made one hell of a team. They pulled off scores across the Midwest, building a reputation and honing their skills. It was during this time that Michael also met Amanda, a stripper who'd eventually become his wife. Talk about a meet-cute, huh? Michael's early life was all about the hustle. He was always looking for the next big score, always planning, always moving. But even then, you could see hints of the guy who'd eventually want to leave it all behind. The guy who'd watch old movies and dream of a different life. That's the early life of Michael deSanta for you, from small-town kid to big-time hustler. It's a classic tale of ambition, crime, and the American dream, just with a GTA twist. Franklin. Franklin was born in 1988 in South Los Santos. Now, if you know your GTA lore, you'll realize this was right around the time things were heating up in Grove Street. But here's the twist. Franklin came of age in the aftermath of all that drama. See, Franklin never knew his dad, and his mom, well, she had her own issues and wasn't really in the picture either. So who raised our boy? It was his grandma who stepped up to the plate. She took Franklin in and did her best to keep him on the straight and narrow. Growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, Franklin's childhood was different from the OGs like CJ. The big gang wars were mostly over, and while the hood was still rough, it wasn't the all-out war zone it used to be. This gave Franklin a unique perspective. He knew about the old ways, but he wasn't as caught up in them. Don't get it twisted, though. Just because things were calmer doesn't mean life was easy. Franklin still had to navigate the challenges of growing up in a tough neighborhood. He linked up with his best friend Lamar Davis early on, and these two were thick as thieves, always looking for ways to make money and move up in the world. Franklin was smart and ambitious, but he also had a rebellious streak. He tried the school thing for a while, even made it to high school, but eventually dropped out. After that, he started getting into some low-level hustles, but nothing too heavy at first. What set Franklin apart was his driving skills. The dude had a natural talent behind the wheel, which eventually led him to a job as a repo man for a shady car dealership. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door to bigger opportunities. Throughout his teens and early 20s, Franklin was always looking for a way out of the hood. He wasn't about that gang life like the old-school gangbangers, but he wasn't afraid to bend the rules either. He was caught between two worlds, the street life he grew up around and the bigger ambitions he had for himself. Finally, the man himself, Trevor. Trevor was born in 1965 up in Canada. Now, when we talk about rough childhoods, Trevor's takes the cake. His dad wasn't in the picture. And his mom? Let's just say she wasn't exactly Mother of the Year material. Trevor grew up dealing with a whole lot of abuse and neglect, which explains, well, a lot about him. School wasn't really Trevor's thing. He was in and out of the system, bouncing between different schools and probably driving more than a few teachers to early retirement. Despite all this, Trevor wasn't dumb. Far from it. The guy had a sharp mind, especially when it came to math and aviation. Speaking of aviation, that's where young Trevor thought he'd found his ticket out. He joined the Air Force with dreams of flying. And you know what? He was good at it. Really good. Trevor had the skills to be a top pilot, but there was one small problem. Dude couldn't keep it together mentally. The military picked up on his, let's say, unstable tendencies, and gave him the boot before he could earn his wings. This rejection hit Trevor hard. It was like the world was telling him he couldn't escape his messed up background, no matter how talented he was. So, what's a guy to do when society rejects him? In Trevor's case, he decided to reject society right back. Trevor started drifting, moving from place to place, getting into all sorts of trouble. He dabbled in all kinds of petty crimes, started experimenting with drugs, and basically lived like he had nothing to lose. Because in his mind, he didn't. It was during this time that Trevor met Michael Townley, later deSanta. These two hit it off like a house on fire. Literally, they probably set a few houses on fire together. They started pulling off bigger and bigger scores, with Trevor's crazy, unpredictable energy complementing Michael's cool, strategic approach. Trevor's early life shaped him into the volatile, loyal, and weirdly principled dude we see in GTA 5. He's a guy who never really had a chance at a normal life, so he decided to embrace the chaos instead. And we are done. Which protagonist had the best backstory? Let me know in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.